Hello, everybody. Welcome to the power session. It is Tuesday. Very excited to be back with you. Been a little bit of a wild week in the world, and we are going to shift our perspective from everything going on in the world to everything going on in our world. We're going to talk about things we have control over. We're going to talk about some things we're going to want to stop trying to have control over, and how to be able to create and strike that accord of influence and collaboration with ourselves. Right now, there is a tremendous need for us to be collaborative as human beings, to be able to actually listen to each other, to avoid the incredible urge for "I told you so's" or other things that just create division, and really find connection with ourselves to be able to create connection with others. That's a huge focus of ours here at Habit Finder. The first thing that we teach anyone, whether it's Global 100 CEOs and publicly traded companies or entrepreneurs that we work with just starting out, it all comes down to connection with people, and the opportunity to be able to create that more authentically every day, to be able to bring people's walls down. We had a phenomenal conversation in our mastermind that I do right before this call with just our Habit Finder coaches. Every week we mastermind as Habit Finder coaches, and just this tremendous shift of, rather than figuring out how many people to talk to so that you can bend the law of averages to your will so that you can get enough clients to be able to justify your investment of time and energy in your coaching business and whatever else. My dad said something in our last session that someone shared has just totally made a massive shift for them. And that was, rather than being focused on how many people to talk to, it was how many people's walls can you bring down today? If that's the goal, to be a talent scout rather than a manipulator or a control freak or someone trying to force an outcome on somebody else, what if you were simply to just look around and see how many people's walls you could bring down today? Because it is in that state of someone's wall being down that connection can actually occur. And when we are actually connected, we can deliver our agenda, we can deliver our services, our products in a much clearer state. Not because it's clear so we're going to be able to get people who shouldn't buy what we have to offer to buy from us, but clear in that it doesn't take the same toll to find out if they're ready for what we have. It doesn't take the same toll to find out if what we have is it's the right time for them, they're ready to receive it. So anyway, just wanted to start today off talking about that, just mentioning that in terms of a great focal point is to be able to get up every morning and just ask yourself, how many people's walls can I bring down today? Because that requires surrender. That requires patience. That requires a comfortability with yourself. Because if we're sitting there juggling and wrestling with our own noise while trying to focus on somebody else, you can imagine that physically happening. It would be very distracting to sit there tossing knives back and forth with someone else in the carnival while you're trying to listen to somebody else. Even if they feel like you're trying to pay attention, it's going to be very distracting in a lot of ways. So bringing people's walls down is one of the greatest skills. Well, bringing their wall down is not a skill. Creating and facilitating a space where someone feels like they can is tremendously important. So, and I wanted to focus on, in terms of our connection with ourselves, something that I think a lot of people try to avoid in their connection with other people, but then don't repeat with themselves. It's one of the reasons why we ask people to focus on other people, because we learn more about how we want to interact with ourselves with how we interact with others. So let's dive into that right now. Hello and welcome. I am Paul Blanchard, president of Habit Finder, and this is our power session. It's ours because I invite you into this space with me to be able to talk about how you're experiencing your life, to be able to talk about how you are interpreting what is going on, what you're trying to problem solve, what you're trying to avoid, what you're trying to create, because it all comes down to this. It comes down to how our brains function. Now, right before we officially kicked off the show, we were talking about something that I hope all of you can take away from this. And that is that rather get focused on the numbers of how many people and how many times, those should be evaluated to make sure that you're being efficient. But the focal point should be, how many people's walls can I bring down today? Now, in terms of being able to focus on other people's walls, we learn a lot by interacting with other people. We learn a lot about how we want people to interact with us by interacting with them. We learn about the golden rule and all these things, but not always do we carry over the experiences that we have with others to the experiences we want to be having with ourselves. There are two tremendously important relationships in our lives. It's the relationship we have with others and the relationship we have with ourselves. Both are just as complicated. Both require just as many guesses and assumptions and explorations and curiosity. A lot of people want to believe that they know themselves really well. And I would agree that you know this part of you that you have been willing to expose really well, but there are infinite numbers of parts to us. And we want to be able to understand how to interact with our intrinsic, and meaning our infinite selves. Meaning, as we learn more about ourselves, there is more to learn about ourselves. As we discover new awareness, we discover new opportunities in our relationship with ourselves. How are we approaching those opportunities? When we have our eyes open to possibility and we see what's possible in our lives, we see the dreams that we could create. We tap into that sense of our potential, though we haven't executed yet. We haven't acquired that potential yet. What tools are we using to get greater access to that? And more importantly, are these tools things that we can sustain? If there's something I've seen over and over and over again, it is that people are settling for tools that work now, not tools that will work in perpetuity. That we're looking for the tool that will solve the problem I've got right now. How do I stop the bleeding? Not how do I prevent the wound from continuing to open and reoccur? How do I change, I need stitches to, and how do I clean up the broken glass on the ground of my life so I stop, cutting my feet on it? So we want to get to the source. Now, the triage is important. We want to understand how to triage ourselves appropriately, how to self-soothe, how to tolerate, how to compensate, to be able to get through the rocking, knocking, and spinning of life. However, we do want to step back occasionally and just see the overarching, the macro, the direction that we are headed, not necessarily just the distance that we have covered. And I'm watching a lot of people, and this is not new. This has been going on for hundreds of years, thousands of years, trying to use very archaic, very forceful weapons on themselves that they would likely not use on others. And maybe some are using it on others. And I think one of the most destructive things that you can use in a relationship with others, and again, remember, that's a type, that's a mirror, a reflection of our relationship with ourselves, is ultimatums. Ultimatums are things that I would imagine most people on here understand don't really work well in good relationships. Now, an ultimatum is simply defined as a final demand. Okay? A final demand. That's an ultimatum. There's something really challenging, really dangerous about final, and equally challenging and dangerous about demand. When we choose to demand something, we require it, we expect it. And we've talked in here before about what expectations do to the brain. Expectations, they make life very myopic. They make things very singular, very tunnel visioned. And the joy is in the spectrum. The joy is in the collateral of life and the journey that we're on and the connections we create along the way. When we get really myopic, we get really focused and zeroed in. It's like a magnifying glass on an ant. We end up burning our lives up. And ultimatums do this very quickly. Now, not often do we reach for an ultimatum immediately. Okay? Ultimatums are usually a last resort, a final demand. But how often are we using a last resort under an illusion? How often are we using this forceful command of demanded obedience or adjustment on ourselves when I would hope, not ever use that on someone else? Now, don't get me wrong. There are life or death situations. There are very important challenges that may require an ultimatum. But in your relationship with yourself, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you would probably never want to use it for you. If there is a systemically dangerous situation that requires one, then sure, I'm sure we could get creative enough to come with a demanding time and place that an ultimatum would be required. But a lot of us are using them on ourselves prematurely and far too often. This is what it looks like. We start to become more aware of ourselves, right? Which when we increase that awareness, what happens? We improve our attitude, right? That's the immediate payoff of awareness. Wow, I've become aware of something that's been holding me back. We kind of feel a little bit of an uptick in our attitude and our energy. I become aware of why that wasn't working. And that futility now gets to be solved. Oh, it creates an uptick. It creates a positive response in our attitude. Then we go to change it. And what realm do we go in to change it? We go in and we change it physically. Most often, we change it externally. Okay, we realize, wow, when I get home and I've had a long day, I just want to order DoorDash. Okay, which has been, a major investment of mine over COVID in 2020, and I'm not proud of that. This is something I'm sharing from personal experience of having my own challenges, my own issues. And so what is my initial reaction? Oh, ultimatum. I'm going to delete the apps. I'm going to make a decision that I'm never going to order DoorDash again. But what I'm really doing is giving my body and my brain a final demand. Do not order DoorDash again or else. Because we have now increased our awareness. We've now improved our attitude. We don't need that anymore. But we're only talking to the external we. We're only talking to the physical we. We haven't understood. We haven't gone deep enough to really listen to the emotional, to the thinking patterns, to the periphery of our lives that usually gives us answers that we weren't expecting. We may have made some assumptions about why we were ordering DoorDash every night. We may have made some assumptions of why we were procrastinating. We usually make assumptions about a lot of things in our lives when basing it on just the external realm. And when we finally get enough of it, awareness is not changing the behaviors, okay? Changing the behaviors is not changing the habits. We keep feeling like we're going back to square one, feel like we charge and we power through and we get further than we did before, but that bungee cord of that action or that pattern or that behavior yanks us back. And oftentimes, because we were putting so much effort into improving it, forcing it to change, right? Forcing it to change, that bungee cord whips us even further back than where we started. And now not only are we feel like we're starting over, but now we feel like we're starting behind. And that just adds to the frustration, adds to the futility, and adds to the energy of needing to lay down the hammer, ultimatum, this is it. This piece of paper I've got, this declaration I've got, this person I'm finally sharing this with is going to make all the difference. It's not true. Those can be helpful. Those can be supplemental. And I say supplemental very deliberately. I've been in fitness and health arenas in my own experimentation with my body and powerlifting and being in the gym and mobility and whatever else. And supplements are a huge hot topic. But at the end of the day, research has proven that supplements only have a 6 to 8% impact on your overall health and your performance. A 6 to 8% impact. Now, if you're an elite athlete, 6 to 8% can be the difference between first place and 50th. So it's not to be ignored. If you are at the elite levels of your profession, your level of expertise, supplements can make all the difference, but you've likely reached there because you've done a lot deeper work than the things that would just require an ultimatum because of frustration, because you're not changing. So we want to start to look at this differently. We want to start to recognize the ultimatums that we make in our lives. I'll share with you an example as a personal story that I've shared on power sessions before, but it is so relevant to the point we're talking about today. And that is that in 2009, okay, or actually 2009, late 2010, I found myself in Virginia in the DC metro area. I had been asked to come and help run the Jack Welch Management Institute. And then short time after that, found myself sitting across from Jack himself, who I consider the the greatest CEO in American history. Rest in peace. He left us this year. An incredible human being that I think there are far too many people that didn't get to know him better, but just got to know him through the media, which I had a completely different experience with him personally than what the media may want to say. Although the media has said plenty of amazing things about him, there's always some misunderstandings with someone that has that kind of power, that kind of influence. But with that said, I found myself in DC and I was on per diem. I was out there. My family hadn't moved out yet. I had about 3 months of work I needed to get done. And I was going to go back for the holidays and then come back out in January. My wife came out in January. We looked for a place to live, and then my family moved out. But during that about 90 days, I had $25 for breakfast, $50 for lunch, and $80 for dinner every day. And I'm a big dude and I can eat, okay, especially if it's seemingly free. And I'm in DC, which is not a shabby culinary geographical location. So I found myself pretty out of shape before I even went, suffering from some major workaholism and then, leaving the bits and pieces outside of that to emotionally eat and binge and whatever, just to get through things. So I found myself after that experience heavier than I had ever been, more out of shape than I'd ever been. I wasn't just big, like I hadn't been in a gym or worked out for several years. And so it just wasn't sitting well, didn't feel good, all these different things. And I was starting to increase my awareness of the physical state that I had found myself in. Looking in the mirror, depressing, trying to, run upstairs, depressing. Thinking about, the glory days of playing football and being in great shape and depressing. And so as I started to become more and more aware of what I was doing and that it wasn't how I wanted to be feeling, I started to explore, okay, what can I do? And so I remember, I'll start working out. That's an obvious option. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go get on the elliptical because it was going to be easier on my knees and my back and whatever, and just start burning some calories and hopefully that lead to eating better. My awareness was being peaked. My plans were making sense. And my behavior was changing for now. But then eventually, had a stressful day and felt like, I don't feel like eating that, so I'm going to order this. And the whole tailspin occurs, and I find myself feeling like I'm right back where I started. I've lost my drive, lost my momentum, and just feeling like it's not going to happen. And after doing this several times, I finally, decided to start making ultimatums. And I found as I started making ultimatums, started demanding that this is what I was going to do. Consciously, cognitively, that this isn't serving you. This is making you worse. So stop it, right? No more. You're done with this. You're sick of it. And so I would build these ultimatums. You are going to do this. There is no other option. Final demand, as if I was going to divorce my body, and if it didn't comply, as if I had some measure that I was actually willing to take that would make the ultimatum effective, which is in negotiation, the only way that you can is if there's only two absolute outcomes. But in your life, there never are, okay? There are never two absolute total outcomes, as much as your brain would love to try and squeeze your life into that all or nothing thinking. And the more ultimatum, the more passionate, more frustrated, more emotional the ultimatum, the less time it lasted. And it was just getting increasingly frustrating. And so I started researching more about psychology. I started getting clear about how the brain works, going back to the principles of Habit Finder. At the time, I wasn't working here, but what we teach here is what had propelled my career to the heights that it had achieved. And just getting back to the ground rules. And I realized that ultimatums were not going to serve me. And there are too many people out there that are just tearing their lives apart, trying to just have these all or nothing inner wars and battles, and thinking that they just need to get more firm with themselves and put their foot down harder. And because they see all these other people talking about it, you just have self-discipline. You just got to embrace the suck. You just got to this, you just got to that. And just do it, right? The Nike philosophy that has destroyed so many people's lives, not Nike, but the philosophy of just do it, is only engaging the external. It's only engaging the physical. And that is not how we change. The only way to change is action with increased consciousness. So the benefit of the ultimatum was to get into action quickly. The damage was the reason you get into action, and the energy around the action actually reduces consciousness. Ultimatums reduce consciousness. If you're given an ultimatum that you have got to go and rob that bank or we'll kill your family, then yeah, consciousness is not expanding in that situation. You are in fight or flight. You are limiting your incredible creativity and your gifts and everything else, and you are operating on bare minimums to survive. And we can only sustain that in that state for so long. The extraordinary chemicals that your body releases in a fight or flight state are not meant to sustain you long term. It's amazing what your body can do in releasing adrenaline to be able to give you additional energy, and releasing cortisol to speed up your metabolism and help heal wounds and all these different things. But long term, both of those things will deteriorate you. They will destroy you. The pathology in older patients is riddled with the effects of overexposure to these chemicals, to these stress drugs. So we know this is not the place we want to live in. We don't want to live in a state of ultimatums. We don't want to live in a state of force. We don't want to live in a state of have to, of final demands, because change, shifting what we're trying to create and who we are, okay, that comes from increased consciousness. So here's what I realized. I realized that I couldn't make an ultimatum to work out. I couldn't make an ultimatum to eat right. I was literally experiencing tremendous adrenal fatigue, because every time I'd get hyped up and pumped up, adrenaline would flow, excitement would pour out, and it became less and less of a bang in my life every time. And so then I'd try and muster up even more and less of a bang. And eventually I was totally out of options. And that is where incredibly deep levels of depression can start to sink in, and hopelessness, that kind of futility that can destroy your life at its deepest levels. And then I decided to do something different. And that's my invitation to you today, is to start to understand the areas of your life that you've been trying to force. Start to recognize some of the things that you've been trying to make happen, and consider a better way. Not that it still doesn't require stick-to-itiveness, not that it doesn't require grit, all of those things. But let me give you the premise in terms of this story. What I finally did is I made a decision. I cut off from the excuses. I cut off from the stories that were holding me back. And I decided that every day, Monday through Friday, that I would log 2 miles on the treadmill before going home. I could walk it. I could go really slow. I could jog it. I could do sprint intervals, whatever I wanted. But I would make sure that treadmill said 2.0 in the distance section before I went home. I'd go down my elevator at my corporate office, and I could turn left and go to the gym, or turn right to the parking garage where my car was. And so that's the decision I made. But what I then did is I made sure that it was ultimatum proof, meaning I got rid of any chance of an ultimatum. And the way you do that is by getting clear about what happens if you don't do it. Getting clear about what happens if you don't do it. Not write it down, not decide what the consequences are. Getting clear being the operative word. Meaning if I'm not going to do it, I have got to make that decision in a state of clarity. How many of you have ever made really, really poor decisions in your life in a state of optimal clarity, in a state of optimal consciousness? Probably not a lot of you, if any of you. Because if that's happening, then we have a completely different fundamental conversation about some major psychological problems in your life. But more often than not, even if you cognitively felt like you were clear, when you decided to have that bowl of cereal late at night and defy your health goals, when you decided to convince yourself that organizing your desk was way more important than making those couple of phone calls that you put off, whatever it is, you're not in a state of clarity. You're in a state of confusion. You're in a state of rationale and justification. And you're in a state of letting your defenses fall down. Not the defenses that come from adrenaline, the defenses that come from fight or flight, the defenses that come from consciousness, from clarity, from being able to see the whole picture, from realizing you're not calling your third prospect, You're calling James, who's an incredible human being that you can't wait to actually connect with and bring his wall down. When we have that kind of clarity, that kind of consciousness to find out where James is living, what James is going through, what really matters, to get an opportunity to be able to see that brings us into a higher state of consciousness. So rather than you're going to do 2 miles on the treadmill or else, which has been my option up to that point for personal ultimatums, I decided to give myself an out. What? You have an escape clause? Yeah, that's what makes it not an ultimatum. Means there is equal opportunity on both sides, meaning when I come down that elevator at night, that I have equal opportunity and equal ability to choose to go and do those 2 miles, which is my commitment, but also a commitment that if I don't, this is what I will do. And those need to be as equal as possible, as equitable as possible, emotionally, because it requires those supportive commitments to remove the ultimatum elements to this. Because the ultimatum as a final demand is do it or death. And whatever iteration of emotional death, spiritual death, physical death, whatever it is that is being imposed by your own mind against yourself for doing something. And so it becomes the only option, which means fight or flight is going to kick in, which means consciousness is going down, and it's going to be even harder to sustain. However, what I did is I said, okay, my commitment is to do 2 miles on the treadmill every night, Monday to Friday, or walk into the gym and say to the treadmill out loud, you win. And if I've done that, I can go home. No, the 2.0 is no longer an ultimatum. Here's the key, though. I didn't just make a commitment that could be done nonchalantly, because the commitment required all the things that heighten one's consciousness to be deployed to meet the counter commitment. Meaning, if I just went and got the 2 miles done, even in a poor state of consciousness, I kept my commitment. I can feel good about that. But if I don't do it, the only option is to feel bad about it and to deteriorate. And if we're already running on fight or flight and we mess up, because we're human, in some area of our life, some commitment we've got, we're going to mess up in one way or another. The only option is to feel terrible, unless we give ourselves permission to get out of it. But the only way out is the way we came in. That's critical. I'm going in with consciousness. I've really thought through this 2 miles, how long that's going to take me, how realistic it is to sustain that. I went into that commitment with consciousness, with clarity. The challenge is if it's an ultimatum, the only option for a brain that is more rebellious than you are is to sneak out the back door. We sneak out the back door and we feel terrible and we didn't learn anything. But if we require ourselves to walk back out the front entrance of our commitment, which is what I was doing, I had to walk into the treadmill. I had to do something physical. Then I had to say something out loud. Huge pattern interrupt. Okay. Neuro-linguistic programming. You're talking about a massive increase of consciousness for me to talk to an inanimate object. I don't know about you, but I don't do that a lot. Okay. So my brain's going to definitely be like, what is going on? And paying more attention than ever before. When I've got to walk into that treadmill and say, you win. I am walking back out the same way I came in through the commitment, rather than doing what happens in most ultimatums, and that's sneaking out the back door and not being able to learn anything from it other than guilt and shame. And guilt and shame do not reinforce patterns in terms of the good ones you want to create. Guilt and shame have only ever reinforced bad patterns. That's all they do. Even when you're doing something good, if guilt and shame are creating it, it eventually will become the noose that tightens around your neck, no matter how good it is. So we'll want to understand that we go through the front door of consciousness to make the commitment, but give yourself an exit clause, so it's not an ultimatum, but an exit clause that requires you to come back out the other door. I've got a lot of clients that work in the health and wellness industry. What this would look like for your clients would be, okay, you're making a commitment to get on a program or to follow a plan or a workout or whatever to be able to find greater levels of health. And so you're going to make that commitment and walk through that front door. Some of you may represent great health products. Some of you represent great health programs. Some of you may represent all of the above. So most people will make that commitment consciously, but not give themselves permission to come out. Well, in that case, the permission to come out may sound a little bit like this. It would be, okay, you're going to follow this program every day, but if you don't, all you have to do is answer these questions out loud, okay, to someone else or on a piece of paper, whatever it is. And the first question would be something like, how do I want to feel tomorrow? And you've got to answer that out loud to yourself. And then another great question is, what does my body really need right now? Those two questions alone are walking back out the front door. You're getting an opportunity to get out, and you're giving yourself a higher state of consciousness in the process. Now, I wish I could tell you that I never walked in to that gym and said to the treadmill, you win, and went home. I wish I could tell you that never happened, but it totally did. But because it wasn't sneaking out the back door, I was able to get right back to it the next day, rather than experiencing the depletion of fight or flight and all or nothing that creates from an ultimatum, because I chose. So even though I was embarrassed that I chose, a deeper part of my character was still honored. The deepest part of your character that you're going to want to be in touch with to change your habits, especially the tough ones. So there was still honor in my exit, which allowed for a much quicker recovery than guilt or shame could ever offer. There were a few times, more than a few times, where I walked in and said, you win, and went home. But there were uncountable times over those 6 months where I walked in to say that, and I went, oh, crap. I could feel the heightened sense of consciousness. I could feel what it was going to feel like to go home not having accomplished my goal. I could feel the stories and the energy that I would have the next morning by not doing it. I could see and feel where my life was going to end up not being on there, all in that moment, because I heightened my consciousness rather than relied on a forceful ultimatum. And there are a lot of times I went in there just ready to go because I had found consistency and accomplishment, and I celebrated it. So it was building confidence. But there were times where you just have a day. And how many of us have had a day and it created a chain reaction that got us right back to where we started? I was able to have a day and have it just be a day. But there were tons of times I went in there to go say, you win. And I was like, oh, I didn't even get out of my suit. I just jumped on in my loafers and my suit and just went for the 2 miles. Just got it done because consciousness was increased. It's not about winning every single battle in your life. That'll create a false sense of confidence, if not arrogance. And it'll lose touch with the greatest weapon we have, and that is our consciousness. That is our increased level of awareness, that when we can tie our actions to that, and it's not always just the actions of what you have to do, it's what you get to do, what you choose to do, what you want to do. And if you don't want to, no problem. Just make sure the requirements to get out of it force you to walk back through the way you came in with a higher state of consciousness. Promise you, this will invite more abundance into your life. It will let go of the demand to be perfect, which will allow you to be better. If you can let go of perfect, you can be better. But the brain doesn't want to settle for better. It wants perfect. It doesn't want a little bit of a solution. It wants a total solution. It doesn't want to feel a little better. It wants to feel all better. It doesn't just want to get rid of the pain. It wants to replace it with pleasure. You can't win that. That's not a battle. That's not a war, for example, that you can win. No war has ever been won by winning every single battle. Sometimes there are battles that need to be lost, but they should be lost with consciousness, because there are lessons to be learned on your way back out the way you came in. You sneak out the back door, you miss all the lessons. And then you just end up becoming a victim of the stories that you tell yourself about you and about others and about how that doesn't work and it just was the wrong program or it's just a bad timing. Now, you're the common denominator here, but you are not the common denominator that requires force and ultimatums. You're the common denominator that will resolve most of what you want to achieve in life through higher levels of consciousness. So give yourself an out, but an out that increases consciousness. Give yourself the love that you would like to receive from others. Treat yourself as the best boss that you've ever had. Best boss that I've ever had would both want to understand me, would both want to hold me to a standard, a high standard, would want me to understand my potential while never forgetting who I already am. That's what we learn by showing up that way for others and then checking ourselves at the door to make sure that we're showing up that way for ourselves. So please surrender the ultimatums. Stop trying to painfully force there will still be pain. Just because you're walking back out the front door doesn't mean it's painless. It's painful to choose consciously to go the other direction. Man, when it's your choice, you gain greater levels of consciousness and confidence in choosing. And you do that consistently enough, you'll find yourself making the right choices more often than not, creating new patterns, new habits, creating new dreams. Thanks so much for listening today. If you know someone that's stuck in this all or nothing, force yourself, just make it happen. We've been around for a long time, 20 years, hundreds of thousands of clients with empirical evidence well beyond just those 20 years. What's working for you right now, if it sounds like an ultimatum, if it sounds like just embrace the pain for the sake of embracing the pain, just break through the obstacle just for the sake of breaking through it, we're missing some incredible lessons in higher states of consciousness. Higher states that we don't get to live in, we get to visit. And we're going to want to learn how to visit more often and be able to stay just a little bit longer. That's how we win. Please share this out if that could serve anyone you know. If this is something you're struggling with, feeling like you're stuck on a hamster wheel. Oh my gosh, Paul, what you're saying makes so much sense. But we'd love to show you a resolution to the but. Love to get an opportunity to dive into your thinking patterns, challenge you if you're ready. You're ready. Not everybody is. Even some people don't want to walk back out the front door. They just want to sneak out the back door, get mugged by their sabotaging patterns of thinking in the alleyway, and then blame it on a bad program, a bad opportunity, a bad break. You've got a lot more power than that. You deserve a lot more than that. Thanks for listening today. We'll see you next time. Bye.